If he has ASD level 1, he's going to have anxiety because he will have, to some degree or another, some mind blindness. He's going to have some degree, sometimes it's worse in others, not so bad in others, it's a mixed bag. Some degree he's going to have some emotions blindness. He's going to have some executive function deficits. He's not going to have all of them, but he's going to have more than one. And he's going to have some sensory sensitivities. There's another thing that I don't talk about too much called weak central coherence. So anyway, there's numerous challenges that come with the disorder, all of which create anxiety. And so this generic he, hypothetical he, will find a lot of anxiety reduction strategies. Some of them are functional, some of them are not functional. But he does engage in a lot of anxiety reduction attempts. For example, spending extensive periods of time on a special interest is a huge de-stressor for him. Due to anxiety, he may slip into a meltdown or a shutdown, or he may engage in false agreement, which is, yeah, you're right, yeah, okay, yeah, whatever you want, just hurry and get the conversation over with, or he may just have an adult temper tantrum. So there's the anxiety due to the things I just listed, the traits of the disorder. Then there are his anxiety reduction attempts. Then the next step in this series of things, most of his anxiety reduction attempts cause relationship problems. So there's 3 steps now. Then she wants to have the talk, wants to work on it. She has a message to deliver. If she's not sensitive to the traits, especially if she doesn't even know about them. The talk, we need to have a talk. Now we're at step 6, it increases his anxiety. And then the cycle starts all over again. Due to mind blindness, emotions blindness, executive function deficits, anxiety, etc., he feels very confused in the marriage because he can't keep up with her social and emotional intelligence and needs and skills. He feels very insecure due to his inability to make her happy and to keep the peace and so on. So he feels very unsafe in this marriage. This causes anxiety. He tries to reduce his anxiety. His anxiety reduction techniques cause relationship problems. And the relationship problems raise his anxiety, and then he feels even more unsafe. So the whole point of this little conversation here is, at any point along the trajectory there could be some type of intervention. Anxiety is the first thing that happens. So there are a ton of anxiety reduction strategies. If you tackle that first thing, the anxiety, and he finds some anxiety reduction strategies, now he's not engaged in some of the more dysfunctional anxiety reduction attempts that cause relationship problems. So now you've intervened at the very front and tackled the second and third step in the sequence. So if the relationship problems are greatly reduced, then she doesn't have to have the talk as much. So now his anxiety is not increased as much. And so the cycle doesn't start over as frequently. And then when it does, it's not as severe. That's the big goal. That's usually what happens when everybody's working the program, is this cycle occurs less frequently, and then even when it does, it's less intense and problematic and lingers not quite as long as it did back in the day. So here's a quick rundown on the executive function deficits that people on the autism spectrum will experience. They won't have all of these, but they'll have more than one. Difficulty understanding non-literal language and nonverbal communication. Difficulty controlling escalating emotions. Getting started on undesirable tasks that are usually of a social nature or something outside of their special interest. Difficulty carrying out more than one cognitive process at a time. Difficulty planning and organizing. Number 6, difficulty recognizing when change is needed and noticing when a social error occurs. Difficulty shifting focus or attention from a desirable activity to an undesirable activity. And working memory deficits. In other words, difficulty identifying the main point, taking all information into account, seeing the big picture, difficulty with reading comprehension and following instructions. All of that is under the umbrella of working memory deficit. Now, one of the executive functions that people on the autism spectrum are very good at is called inhibition. That's the ability to contain the desire to do something in order to stay on task until it's finished. So one of their greatest assets is they can stay highly focused for extended periods of time on one thing.
So, are you an individual on the autism spectrum who has been blamed by your partner or spouse of being insensitive, selfish, and even narcissistic? If so, you may have a condition that is a comorbid condition of Asperger's or high-functioning autism. And I run into this pretty much in every case when I'm working with couples. The NT spouse, almost without exception, blames the autistic spouse of purposefully being selfish and uncaring and totally lacking in empathy. So we'll take a deep dive here and look at alexithymia, which is the condition associated in most cases, if not all cases, of Asperger's and high-functioning autism. If I have alexithymia, I have a real difficulty recognizing emotions and their subtleties and textures. It makes it real difficult for me to understand the intricacies of what others feel and think. Some more examples would be, if I have this condition, I would have a detached and tentative connection to others. I'd be hypersensitive to some physical sensations, perhaps especially touch. I would have a constricted style of thinking, limited or rigid imagination, and I would have difficulty recognizing facial cues in others, expressing feelings, identifying different types of feelings, and I would have a limited understanding of what even causes feelings. Now, there are two dimensions to alexithymia. One would be called the affective dimension, and this is where difficulties arise in reacting, expressing, feeling, and imagining, which would be the experiencing part of our emotional experience. And then there's also the cognitive dimension, and this is where the individual struggles to identify, interpret, and verbalize feelings, which is the thinking part of our emotional experience. So if I have alexithymia, I'm basically emotionally unresponsive. And this can be perceived by my neurotypical spouse as being uncaring or just not making her important. So it's important for your neurotypical spouse to realize that the missed cues, the flat reactions, or the lack of emotional recognition have real psychological and neurobiological origins. I have run into countless people on the autism spectrum when we're doing relationship work where the individual with alexithymia has been literally punished, shamed, and even mocked for his or her emotional unresponsiveness. If this is the case with you, realize that your neurotypical partner does not speak, hear, or sense the same emotional language as you. And as a result, and as you probably have experienced, this can cause a lot of conflict and misunderstandings in the relationship. So what can be done? Well, if I have this condition called alexithymia, my goal is going to be to strengthen my ability to identify and understand feelings. I'll need to begin the business of teaching myself about the subjective experiences of others. I'll need to keep in mind that stretching and learning emotional awareness is also going to be a very long journey for me, especially if I'm 35, 45, 55 years old. But there are some things that can be done to improve in this area. And I will put a few suggestions to get you started on some self-help strategies below this video. So in summary, alexithymia is a trait that makes it hard for me to find words for thoughts and to find words for feelings. It's kind of a lack of vocabulary in the emotions department. This can be mild to moderate to severe. Some people have such a mild version of alexithymia that it virtually goes unnoticed. Others have a severe form of alexithymia such that their partners almost believe that he or she is narcissistic or even sociopathic, quite honestly. So when identified, alexithymia can be treated with the goal of making feelings and their textures easier to navigate. And again, if you'll look below this video, I have a few suggestions to get you started. So, a quick message to all the burned out NT wives out there, the ones that are burned out because you've been doing all or most of the relationship work. Here's your new mantra. How can I conserve energy? I want you to begin thinking, I need to conserve energy now, because all your arguing, lecturing, threatening, reasoning with, compromising, getting angry with is burning up precious energy that is going to affect you someday. You're wasting precious energy, and it's going to affect your mental health and your physical health. You're wasting it because your efforts, even though your heart's in the right place, it's yielding no positive result, and in too many cases it's making a bad problem worse. You have to stop that. You're burned out. Conserve your energy. Save your energy for the things that are effective. Save your energy for the things you say and do that actually yield some kind of a positive outcome. So if you've been doing too much of the relationship work and you're burned out, think energy conservation. Hi ladies, this is Mark, and I have a special message to the NT wives out there, and that is this: your resentment only hurts you. Your resentment only hurts you. Why is that? Well, when you're experiencing the negative emotions associated with a neurodiverse marriage, and you're ruminating about all the things that you downloaded as unfair and all the injustice, and he's not emotionally reciprocal. Yesterday he forgot it was our anniversary. He never follows through with what I want him to do. The last time he told me that he loves me, I don't even remember. All of these things create a fight or flight response. Your amygdala starts secreting little doses of cortisol and adrenaline, which weakens your immune system, which makes you physically and mentally sick. It will hurt you. Your resentment only hurts you. When there's conflict in the marriage, and you're the one that is more uptight and taking more responsibility than he is, and you're sitting over there wanting to have an emotional vomit, but he's not going to listen to it. He's over there playing his video games, decompressing, and engaging his parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest or digest. So you're over here, you have engaged your sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight, which means cortisol, cortisone, adrenaline, noradrenaline. All of these stress chemicals are flooding your body, and you're getting weaker. He's over there engaged in his special interest, operating under a parasympathetic nervous system, rest or digest. He's getting stronger. Who wins? Whose resentment is killing whom? Hey guys, this is Mark. And sometimes I get email. It's usually from the neurotypical wife. She goes, how do I know whether or not I should go? Because she's been having problems with her autistic husband for a long time, right? So, say flip a coin. I'm gonna have to explain that because this is gonna be a little more involved than just whether it's heads or tails. I'll give you an example. Let's say you're gonna have heads be, I'm going to file for divorce. Tails is, no, I'm going to continue to tough it out. I'm going to hang in there. Maybe we can do counseling or something. So heads, divorce, tails, you're going to continue to stay there. You flip it. Let's say it comes up heads. So that's divorce, right? So here's the gist of this little coin toss. When it comes up heads and you've assigned heads to being, I'm going to get a divorce, you look at its heads, how does that feel in your gut? Is your thought, oh, I'm just not ready for that right now. I know heads is divorce, but timing's not right, and maybe someday, but no, not right now. Or maybe it comes up tails, which is hang in there. And maybe you have a feeling in your gut going, oh God, to just continue with this neurodiverse marriage, I don't think I can handle it. So the whole point is not whether it comes up heads or tails. It's when you've assigned one thing to one side and the other thing to the other side, they're polar opposites, right? How does it feel in your gut? That's what I want you to pay attention to, not so much the coin in and of itself. So you're going to here's the summary. You're going to pretend like, and you can do this any way you want. Heads can be one thing, tails can be a different thing. And by the way, this is a two-way street. This applies to the ASD husband that might be flipping the coin too. So you pick one side or the other is going to represent separation or divorce. And then you pick the other side is I'm going to continue to hang in there and tough it out. And then let's say your intention is to follow through. I know it's hypothetical. You flip it, comes up, do a gut check. How does that feel? It's heads, that means divorce. How do I feel in that moment? It's tails, that means continue to tough it out. How does it feel? Maybe heads for you means to stay in there. Maybe you assign heads to, I'm going to continue to fulfill my marriage vows. Now, how does that feel? So a lot of times we think from the neck up. I'm asking you to think from the waist up so that you can do a check-in with your gut and your heart, and then lastly, your head. I wouldn't trust your head on these life-changing decisions. I would trust your gut, though. So don't think from the neck up, think from the waist up, and do your little coin toss. And when it comes up, heads or tails, and you've assigned a certain thing to that outcome, how does it feel? How does it feel? And then make your decision based on that. That's the answer to that question. Hey guys, this is Mark Hutton with AdultAspergersChat.com, and in this brief video I want to look at one of the reasons why your partner with Asperger's syndrome or high-functioning autism is less able to cope with unexpected change. If you've been in a relationship with someone with Asperger's syndrome and you have had to have some conversations with them that are somewhat stressful, perhaps something to do with finances or moving or the children or whatever, or you have decided to make some significant changes to one degree or another, you may have noticed that your Asperger's partner gets extremely agitated and annoyed and has heightened anxiety. Well, according to researchers, cortisol, which is the body's stress hormone, may be a key factor in understanding both Asperger's and high-functioning autism. Cortisol is one of the several stress hormones that acts similar to a red alert that is triggered by stressful circumstances, which helps the individual react quickly to changes. In neurotypical people, there's a twofold increase in levels of cortisol within 30 minutes of waking up, with levels gradually declining during the day as part of the internal body clock. However, research suggests that people with Asperger's and high-functioning autism don't have this peak. This difference in stress hormone levels may be highly significant in explaining why people on the autism spectrum are less able to react and cope with unexpected change. Studies reveal that these individuals may not adjust normally to the challenge of a new environment on waking, which may affect the way they subsequently engage with the world around them. So by viewing the symptoms of Asperger's and high-functioning autism as a stress response rather than a behavior problem can help partners or spouses of people on the autism spectrum develop a plan for minimizing or even avoiding circumstances that may cause anxiety in the person with the disorder.
As a result of having this low-functioning social-emotional brain, I have this thing called mind blindness. In other words, I have a hard time predicting what might be in the mind of my partner or spouse. I have a hard time imagining what they might be thinking or feeling. So I truly have no clue how the other person feels and thinks. So as a result, when they have a perspective or opinion that's different from mine, I can't wrap my brain around their perspective. I can't, in a sense, peel myself out of my body and crawl into her body and look through her eyes and see things through her lens. So if I have this mind blindness, her viewpoint makes utter nonsense to me. So since I'm blind to her perspective, I will tend to view her differing opinion as she's disagreeing with me. She's trying to argue with me, which is a thinking error. So I make this thinking error because she is disagreeing with me, therefore she's against me. I make that leap of logic right there. So then I continue with another thinking error. Because she's against me, I have to defend myself and prove that she's wrong and illogical and overly emotional. If I don't make her wrong, that means I'm wrong, because only one person can be right. And that must be me, since my perception is the only perception I can see. Emphasis on see, because I have mind blindness and I can't see hers. So in other words, since I can't comprehend her thoughts or feelings, her thoughts and feelings are not valid. Okay? So it's like, think of color blindness perhaps, where I'm colorblind, I have the Asperger's, and I'm colorblind, I only see in shades of gray. And the NT wife, for example, she sees this rich mosaic picture and she's pointing out all the colors. And she says, blue, red, well, look at that pretty turquoise. And I'm going, no, that's just all gray. And then we get into this argument because I have my filter and she has her filter. And since I can't see through her eyes and see all the different colors, I just assume quite honestly that she's just a nutcase and doesn't even know what she's talking about. And I totally invalidate her opinion at that point.
Everybody with Asperger's syndrome or high-functioning autism is different, and so the traits manifest differently given the person, and also it varies from situation to situation. But most Asperger's-related behavior, sometimes misinterpreted by the NT spouse or partner as insensitivity, tends to revolve around the Asperger's individual's resistance to any kind of change. So it would be helpful to think in terms of when your husband is like really super resistant to any type of change, that's usually a sign that it's related to an Asperger's trait. So an Asperger's individual is resistant to change for many reasons. For example, he has anxiety about a current or upcoming event. Due to mind blindness, he has a general misunderstanding of how the real world works. He tends to have difficulty understanding the actions and feelings of someone else. And your husband may have some other issues going on. A very prominent one is ADD. He may be resistant to change because he's reluctant to participate in an activity he can't do perfectly or an activity that is too difficult. Most people with Asperger's do have a strong need to control the situation, and they typically have difficulty transitioning to another activity, especially if the current activity is not finished. So any or all of these triggers can result in certain behavioral patterns that look like insensitivity and selfishness. For example, he may argue, he may have an adult tantrum, he may melt down, he may refuse to listen to you, he may pout, and so on. But keep in mind that Asperger's syndrome is a developmental disorder. So developmentally, he is challenged, and what I mean by that, his social emotional brain is immature compared to his chronological age. Also, the triggers that I listed, these triggers have more to do with anxiety and rigidity than it does, just wanting to upset you or hurt you. The typical Asperger's brain does not take in what is going on around him. He's not able to read between the lines. He doesn't understand implied directions, doesn't understand social cues, doesn't understand facial expression or body language. And so all of this does kind of give the appearance as if he doesn't care. And in many cases, it may give the appearance that he's purposely trying to be hurtful. So uncovering triggers for negative behaviors is very important. It would be good for him to keep a diary, or maybe you could keep the diary noting any events surrounding negative behaviors, the details of his responses, and so on. And this is not to get him off the hook. He's still responsible for his behavior, and having a developmental disorder is not a license to hurt other people. Having said that, people with Asperger's syndrome are often unable to resist giving in to their obsessions and compulsions. Because they have difficulty interpreting social cues, they can come off as being egocentric. It's difficult for them to fully appreciate what impact their behaviors have on others. And due to trouble handling changes in routine, even a simple variation in your husband's schedule or routine may be enough to cause him to have a rage attack or a meltdown or a shutdown. So to summarize, when you're trying to decide the difference between Asperger's related behavior versus pure insensitivity, that has nothing to do with the disorder, it would be helpful to think in terms of the fact that he is resistant to change, he prefers routine and predictability, and when that gets disrupted, his behavior that looks like insensitivity is probably mostly related to Asperger's syndrome. With mind blindness, you're not really sure what other people are feeling, what they're thinking, what their motives might be, and so they're always trying to guess what's going on with other people in the social realm. And this is very anxiety provoking. And so that's why they really love routine and predictability, to cut down on the guesswork involved with trying to figure out how people operate. So therefore, they're very resistant to change. And they do have some dysfunctional coping mechanisms to deal with their anxiety around change that can look like insensitivity. So we need to look at two things, really: mind blindness and alexithymia. Now, these are two traits that are often found in Asperger's and high-functioning autism. You can think of mind blindness as the inability to predict the beliefs and intentions of others. And you can think of alexithymia as the inability to identify and interpret emotional signals in others and also in one's self. And this, in turn, reduces the ability to be empathically attuned to others. So let's look at each of these in turn. We'll look at mind blindness first. So mind blindness is essentially the opposite of empathy, and it can be described as an inability to develop an awareness of what's in the mind of another person. The typical brain, for example, let's say you are talking to somebody and they have a certain facial expression and they have certain body language and they have a certain tone of voice, and you're weighing all that in conjunction with their actual words, and you may be able to be pretty good at predicting, how that person is feeling or what they're thinking or what their general attitude is. Well, people with mind blindness, they don't have that ability. So generally speaking, people with mind blindness are delayed in developing what is called a theory of mind. Another way of saying this is the person with mind blindness can't conceptualize, understand, or predict emotional states in other people. Now, alexithymia can be described as a state of deficiency in understanding, processing, or describing emotions. The person with alexithymia, they have trouble imagining outcomes. They have difficulty predicting how their behavior is going to impact others. They have trouble describing feelings to other people. They're not sure how they feel. They're not sure how you feel. They have difficulty identifying feelings and distinguishing between feelings and the bodily sensations associated with those feelings. Now, there's two kinds of alexithymia. There's what is called primary alexithymia, and we'll just call it an ongoing psychological trait that does not alter over time. And that speaks to the business of the Asperger's brain being hardwired. That is something that can't be fixed. But then there's secondary alexithymia, and that is a state-dependent situation. And it usually disappears after the evoking stressful situation has changed. So that second version of alexithymia depends on the situation. Now, the typical deficiencies that result from alexithymia, as I mentioned a little bit ago, can include a lack of imagination, lack of intuition, lack of empathy, and it also results in the person with Asperger's being more driven towards relating to objects and tasks rather than people. Additionally, it would be concrete, realistic, logical thinking, often to the exclusion of emotional responses to problems. You may find that your Asperger's man is highly logical. There's few dreams or fantasies due to this business of having a restricted imagination. They may treat themselves as robots. They have problems identifying, describing, and working with one's own feelings. And they have a real problem identifying, describing, and working with their partner's feelings. So alexithymia creates interpersonal problems because these individuals avoid emotionally close relationships. Or if they do form relationships with others, they tend to position themselves in either a dependent, dominant, or impersonal position. And the reason they do that is because they want the relationship to remain superficial. A secondary issue related to alexithymia involves the inability to identify and modulate strong emotions. And that's usually, with the Asperger's man, anger. And so the inability to modulate emotions leaves the person prone to sudden affective outbursts, such as rage, meltdowns, or in some cases, shutdowns. So if your situation is like most that I hear about, it's not uncommon for your husband to go into meltdowns. Looks like an adult version of a temper tantrum, raging and being very critical of you. So in most cases, the individual with Asperger's is having a lot of anxiety, and they want to release that anxiety because anxiety is nothing more than a bunch of pent-up, uncomfortable emotions. And so they tend to want to have a verbal vomit on their partner to discharge this uncomfortable, anxious feeling. And unfortunately, when they discharge their anger and their anxiety onto their partner, they feel better, but their partner now feels like shit, quite honestly, because they've been used as a scapegoat and a whipping post. Oftentimes when the Asperger's person goes into the meltdown or rage, they will report a feeling of being unwillingly detached from the world. In other words, they feel a disconnect, and it's like they didn't really volunteer for this disconnect. It can just look like a pure case of emotional abuse to the observer, but what's really going on is the Asperger's, in this case, Asperger's man, is having a real internal struggle, and he's trying to figure out a way to discharge this anxiety, and unfortunately this is done in a very dysfunctional way. It's his destructive coping mechanism. Now, people with mind blindness and alexithymia, when they become an adult, they do have great difficulty finding a life partner or getting married due to poor social skills. Because if you have mind blindness and you're not really attuned to what other people might be feeling, and you struggle with empathy, and if you have alexithymia, which you're in a situation where you're almost overly logical, clearly you can understand why that would get in the way of social skills. And a relationship is, by definition, exchanging social interaction. The complexity and inconsistency of the social world often poses extreme challenges to individuals with this mind blindness and alexithymia business. So that doesn't necessarily help you feel better, but it may help you understand the deficits that your husband has that appear to make him selfish, uncaring, insensitive. That's what it looks like, and that's what it feels like, and that's totally understandable. However, if you look deeper, you will realize that indeed there is some brain wiring that is different, that prevents him from relating to you in a more loving, compassionate way. Oftentimes, when you see the ugly side of your husband, what's really going on inside him is he's struggling to comprehend what's going on in a problematic situation, and also dealing with the anxiety associated with not being able to comprehend what's going on in a social situation.
Hi, this is Mark, and I have a brief message for the neurotypical spouses out there today, and I specifically want to broach the topic of self-imposed pressure. Now, we have these things called automatic thought patterns, and they can play a huge role in how the brain and nervous system respond to everyday stressors and whether they decide to create or amplify painful negative emotions, such as depression, anger, grief, and even resentment. So a question for you: is it possible that you may have some of the personality traits that lead you to put excessive pressure on yourself, or spark recurring critical and negative thought patterns? For example, would you say you have constant worry and fear surrounding the relationship difficulties? Is it on your mind a lot? Could it be said that you are perfectionistic or have high expectations of yourself? Are you a people pleaser and have an intense desire to be well liked? How about an overly guilty conscience? A strong inner critic? Do you think it's possible that you have frequent feelings of shame? Like maybe I'm not good enough, or I'm not as pretty or as smart or as sexy as I used to be, or I'm undesirable for some reason. Would you say you are a serial caregiver, where you overextend yourself for others? How about your self-esteem? Is that low? And could it be said that you have a lack of personal boundaries and that you often feel that you are a doormat? So it would be helpful if you would want to journal about this topic for 15 to 20 minutes. And we're specifically looking at pressure that you impose upon yourself. So come up with a list of some ways that you may be doing this, and then read through each item and notice how remembering that event associated with the trait that you have, the self-imposed pressure trait, notice how remembering that impacts you emotionally. You may be surprised at which situations feel the most present. So don't judge your reaction, just notice them and then do a bit of soul searching and see if some of these traits can be reduced or entirely eliminated. Now, this is just one small preview of the emotional work that we do in the Cassandra Syndrome Recovery Group. Feel free to join. I would love to have you. There's a link below this video if you want to investigate.
The number one thing that gets in the way with you having a relatively stress-free relationship with her, the NT wife, is your anxiety. So we're thinking in terms of how to we're going to reverse engineer. You want to improve the relationship with her. You're here. You wouldn't be here if that wasn't something that was somewhat important to you. Have to reduce your anxiety before that's going to happen, though. What do you have to do before you reduce your anxiety? You're going to have to relax. What are you going to have to do before you relax? You're going to have to slow your mind down and your body down. There's this mind-body connection, as I'm sure you know. And one can lead the other, and one can follow the other. In high anxiety moments, you'll have to slow your body down before your mind will slow down. In high anxiety moments, the mind can't slow itself down, but it'll follow the body if you slow your body down. So in order to relax, you have to slow your mind down and you have to slow your body down. What do you have to do before you can slow your mind down? You're going to have to do some breath work. I recommend 5 minutes a few times a day, preferably 5 minutes 3 times a day, where you're going to go somewhere and shut your brain off and be away from people and things and environmental stimuli. And I'm just going to focus on my in-breath and out-breath for 5 minutes. And with each out-breath, I'm going to also focus on relaxing my muscles. I'm going to in-breath, I'm going to exhale, and just kind of sink into my seat. So there's the breath work, and then there is on my exhale, I'm going to focus on reducing the tension in my muscles. And that will slow the body down. And the other way I want you to begin slowing your body down is just move more slowly. Get up more slowly, sit down more slowly, walk more slowly, talk more slowly, drive more slowly. Literally force yourself to behave like a 95-year-old man. Slow your ass down. Until you do all that stuff there that I just laid out, you're never going to get, we just reverse engineered. I want to have a better relationship with her. Well, isn't this a hell of a note? In order to have a better relationship with her, I have to take 5 minutes 3 times a day and focus on breath and muscle tension and physically slow all my talking and movements down? Yes, you got it. Bingo. Because until you fix that anxiety piece, no, you're not getting anywhere.
So today I want to talk about how to reduce your relationship stress. This is specifically for people on the autism spectrum, although it can certainly apply to the neurotypical partners as well. But in order to help you reduce your relationship anxiety, we have to talk about scattered thinking, because scattered thinking is the #1 source of your anxiety. And scattered thinking looks exactly like this. It's thoughts that we have in the past and in the future. Thoughts in the past would be ruminations and regrets. Ruminations would be where you play the movie in your mind about the hurtful things that the other person said or did, or maybe they didn't follow through with something you wanted them to say or do. Regrets would be the things that you said or did that you wish you had not, or maybe things that you wish you had followed through with but you did not. Also in the past, we have neutral reflections and positive reflections. A neutral reflection would simply be remembering something in the past that wasn't good, bad, right, or wrong. You were just kind of indifferent about it. It happened, and it's not a big deal. Positive reflection is pleasant memories of something that happened in the past, something that somebody said or did that was quite nice. Another way we have scattered consciousness is dealings with the future. So that would include worry, which is
you're overly concerned about what somebody might say or do, or you're overly concerned that the person will not follow through with something that you do want to be said or done. And then we have neutral anticipation, which is expecting something to happen that's not good, bad, right, or wrong. You're kind of indifferent about it. For example, you expect to go to work tomorrow. And then we have positive anticipation, which is you're looking forward to something that might happen or that you know will definitely happen. For example, you have a planned vacation next month. So this is how we get lost in the past and in the future, which by default removes us from the present moment. We're no longer in the here and now. We're lost in our head. And with ruminations and regrets about the past, alongside worries about the future, your anxiety goes up, 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 which makes it even more unlikely that you will be able to be present in the moment, focusing on the here and now. So of these different forms of consciousness, we want to keep the positive reflections, we want to keep the positive anticipations, and we want to throw in the third and most important one, which is being here now. Being focused on the present moment, being mindful of what's going on with your breathing, with your body, with the task at hand, instead of getting lost in a negative sense in the past or the future. So, in summary, to reduce your anxiety, you're going to make your consciousness less scattered, which means you're going to focus on positive reflection, positive anticipation, and being in the present moment. Those three and those three alone. Hey guys, this is Mark, and I got a quick message to neurotypical spouses. A potential source of sensory overload for a person with ASD level 1 is voice, especially tone of voice. So your autistic spouse may analyze voice tone first and then decode the words used by you later. So any voice inflection by you that remotely conveys a negative attitude, for example, sarcasm, irritation, criticism, and so on, may be detected by your spouse and then taken personally. If your autistic spouse downloads your tone as being negative, it's going to cause a problem, particularly if he's not sure why you are using a particular inflection. He might be thinking, is she upset with me? Did I do something wrong? Why does she sound mad? And so on. And now you get this loop effect that can occur in his thinking process. In other words, he mulls over the comment that you made long after the conversation has ended, and then anxiety, agitation, and fear increase as he attempts to analyze the motive behind what you said. People with ASD are logical thinkers and sometimes overly logical, which means they're overthinking, which means they're overanalyzing. So if you get pushback from your spouse, and it's a mystery to you as why, it's possible that he perceived or downloaded your delivery as critical.
So a lot of spouses on the autism spectrum have what I'm just going to call learned helplessness. And this phenomenon occurs when the autistic spouse comes to believe that he has little or no control over the relationship difficulties, and that whatever he does to try to change a bad situation is futile. So as a result, this discouraged spouse will stay passive in the face of any unpleasant, harmful, or damaging state of affairs, even when he actually does have the ability to improve his circumstances. Now, learned helplessness can be thought of as believing you are incompetent, that you have no control over the outcome, that it doesn't matter what you say or do, since outcomes no longer depend on actions, and that your actions are pointless. So in order to qualify for this learned helplessness, the person on the spectrum really needs to have these three conditions in place. He has to become inappropriately passive, and this passivity has to follow exposure to numerous unresolved arguments with his spouse, and there is a change in the way this person thinks about his ability to control similar future marital conflict. The spouse on the spectrum with learned helplessness has certain rationalizations and self-talk that could go something like this. Adopting a passive stance provides me with a sense of control over my life circumstances. Beating my head against a brick wall wastes time and energy and is potentially harmful. Hope has its limits. Persistent attempts to control the uncontrollable are futile, and remaining passive allows me to conserve energy when the evidence tells me there is simply nothing else for me to do. So when a spouse on the spectrum feels like it doesn't matter what I say or do, it's never good enough, and my attempts to work on the relationship make the problems worse, This individual will tend to have an external locus of control. For example, he may say things to himself like, I have no control over what happens to me or what happens in this relationship. And he will tend to view unwanted outcomes as permanent. For example, because we couldn't resolve the most recent conflict, therefore we probably won't be able to resolve any conflicts. So we could say that this individual is easily discouraged and somewhat pessimistic, and so he will tend to highlight and emphasize risks. He will highlight problems, is likely to suffer anxiety and depression, is overly concerned with safety and currently does not feel safe in the relationship, is often very passive, which would take the form of shutdowns. He will tend to promote caution, critical thinking, skepticism, and defensive measures. He will recover slowly after an argument, if at all, and quite honestly, he simply feels defeated and stops trying. So this individual needs to realize that there is this other thing called an internal locus of control, which is, I do have control over circumstances. I can't control everything, but I can control me. I can control my responses. I do have some ability and power in this relationship. And he also needs to understand that the vast majority of things are not permanent. Rather, they are temporary. Hey guys, this is Mark. Actually, I should say, hey ladies, because this is a video for the NT wives. I think the title of this video will be All the Things You Did Right and the One Thing You Did Wrong. But the things you did right, well, were replete. You did many things right. And here's just a few. This is just a tiny smidgen of all the things you've done right. This video is not meant to criticize you, by the way. In fact, if anything, it's meant to compliment you and encourage you. Several things you did right. You tried to get him to reconnect. Let's say, for example, in the beginning, he was masking. I mean, not all people with ASD level 1 mask, but let's say, for sake of example, you found this guy and you had emotional reciprocity and things were going well. And so he masked and tried to present well. And one of his masking techniques was to be very connected. And so once he stopped masking, he also stopped connecting. And so you tried to get him to reconnect. Your intentions were good. There was no malicious intent there on your part, trying to get him to, well, we were getting along so well. And something happened, and now he's involved in his special interest over here, and I don't feel important anymore. And so you tried really hard to get him back in the game. Yeah, that was a good thing. That's something you did right. Your heart was in the right place. You were doing the best that you knew how to do given the circumstances. You tried multiple things. You did your research online. If you're watching this video, obviously you're online researching ASD level 1, or you've been on this road for a long time and you're just kind of trying to continue to figure it out. You love this guy. We're using the NT wife and the ASD husband as the example. You love this guy, you respect him, you care about him. You may have even gotten angry with him, but even that was something that you were doing right, in my opinion. You weren't getting angry because you were trying to push him away. You're getting angry to try and pull him in. So I could go on for easily another 15 or 20 minutes pointing out all the things that you did right. The summary is this. You love the guy. You care about the guy. He's super important to you. The marriage is important to you. You've tried really hard to reestablish trust, reestablish a bond, reestablish hope, reestablish safety in the marriage. God bless you. You gave it your best shot. The one thing you did wrong, you assumed that he didn't care. You assumed that, well, all of this disconnectedness and this lack of emotional reciprocity is because he's selfish, insensitive, uncaring, narcissistic. No. This disconnectedness, this lack of emotional reciprocity, this seemingly lack of empathy is a trait of the disorder. ASD level 1 is a disorder such that the social and emotional brain is underdeveloped. So he doesn't
match you with social and emotional intelligence. You're way up here. You're very socially and emotionally smart. He is not. You're very socially and emotionally skilled. He's way down here. You have a lot of social and emotional needs. He does not. And you assumed he's way down here because he doesn't care. No. He cares, but he doesn't know how to show that he cares.
First of all, I don't want you to frame it as I'll never be normal, because you are normal for somebody who's on the autism spectrum. And there's no shame in having autism. Only about millions and millions of other people had it and have it. And there's way more strengths than challenges that come with this. You will have some strengths that a neurotypical male your age will not have. We wouldn't be on the programmable computer right now if it wasn't for somebody with Asperger's syndrome. So it's not that you're not normal, it's that you're not typical. Currently, the neurotypicals outnumber the autistics, but autism is on the rise, ASD level 1. So it's conceivable that at some point, people with ASD level 1 will outnumber the neurotypicals. So now the neurotypicals are not typical. So be careful with this. I know this is a tangential point. Be careful with this business of viewing yourself as not normal. No, you're just fine. And the reason that the NT wives have such difficulty accepting is because she's way up here with social and emotional intelligence. She's way up here with social and emotional skills. She's way up here with social and emotional needs. You're way up here with logic and general IQ. So she is up here high in SQ, which is social intelligence, EQ, which is emotional intelligence. You're way up here with logical intelligence and general IQ. But when you compare yourself to her, if you can see my hands here, if you compare yourself to her in the social and emotional intelligence department, you're way down here. I'm not saying you don't have emotions or don't have any social skills, but compared to her, you're way down here. ASD is a disorder where the social and emotional brain is underdeveloped. That's why they call it a developmental disorder. Doesn't mean you're dumb. You're probably smarter than me. Doesn't mean you don't have strengths. You got a ton of strengths. She's highly intuitive and she needs connection. You're not very intuitive at all. And you could go all year without talking about feelings. You could go all year without having some warm, fuzzy emotional connection with her. They don't understand, given their high level of social and emotional intelligence and intuition, this is their version of mind blindness. They can't wrap their brain around the idea that you're way down here. And they expect that you should be able to come up here and meet me at this level of emotional reciprocity. You should be able to do that. You could do better if you just put your mind to it. She's uneducated. Or she has educated herself on the traits of the disorder, but is still in denial. Okay, cognitively, I understand mind blindness, emotions blindness, executive function deficits, anxiety, sensory sensitivities, weak central coherence, problems with prediction, but I still think he could do better. Called denial, ladies. Denial.
Autism spectrum disorder. They didn't go to all the trouble of putting that in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, version 5, if it was just a condition or a different way of thinking. Okay? It's not the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Conditions.
Hey guys, this is Mark, and I got a quick message to neurotypical spouses. A potential source of sensory overload for a person with ASD level 1 is voice, especially tone of voice. So your autistic spouse may analyze voice tone first and then decode the words used by you later. So any voice inflection by you that remotely conveys a negative attitude, for example, sarcasm, irritation, criticism, and so on, may be detected by your spouse and then taken personally. If your autistic spouse downloads your tone as being negative, it's going to cause a problem, particularly if he's not sure why you are using a particular inflection. He might be thinking, is she upset with me? Did I do something wrong? Why does she sound mad? And so on. And now you get this loop effect that can occur in his thinking process.
In other words, he mulls over the comment that you made long after the conversation has ended, and then anxiety, agitation, and fear increase as he attempts to analyze the motive behind what you said. People with ASD are logical thinkers and sometimes overly logical, which means they're overthinking, which means they're overanalyzing. So if you get pushback from your spouse, and it's a mystery to you as why, it's possible that he perceived or downloaded your delivery as critical.
Hey guys, this is Mark, and today I want to talk about a conditioned reaction. What is a conditioned reaction? Well, another way of putting it is you are associating one thing with another. For example, you're associating a particular person with anxiety, or you're associating a particular activity with anger, or you're associating a particular subject matter that needs to be discussed with fear. So here's some examples that will help you make sense of this, and I'll put it in the form of a question. Is it possible that you have associated your spouse, and we're talking about the neurodiverse marriage here, where one person has autism and the other one is a neurotypical, have you associated your spouse with anxiety? In other words, we'll use the ASD husband and the NT wife as the example. She doesn't have to say or do anything. She just has to show up in the same room that you are, and you automatically feel some tension. So now you've associated her presence with anxiety. You've been programmed at an unconscious level now because of past events to associate those two. That's called a conditioned reaction. So that was an example of associating a particular person with anxiety. Let's look at an example of associating a particular location or place with anger. Let's say in times past, whenever the entire family tried to eat dinner together at the same dinner table, we'll use the example of the ASD husband. Maybe he has sensory sensitivities. Maybe the children are noisy or are talking too loudly and so on. And so the autistic husband, through sensory overload, now chastises the children. Then the NT mom thinks that that was unfair and she chastises the autistic husband. And so the whole dinner experience becomes an anger control mess. And so now, based on previous experiences from there being so much anger at the dinner table, just sitting down at the dinner table, before you even put one morsel of food in your mouth or one person has said anything, you're automatically angry. And this happens at an unconscious level. That's another example of a conditioned reaction. So you get the point, right? And you can pair up a person with an emotion, or a particular place or location with an emotion, or a particular activity with an uncomfortable emotion. So the question is, are you associating a particular place, person, activity, or subject matter with anxiety or anger or fear or sadness even? And if so, when you experience any of these things that would otherwise be neutral because of a conditioned reaction, are you setting up a self-fulfilling prophecy to where the thing turned out exactly how you thought it would, but in a way that, of course, you did not want it to turn out that way? So if you feel like you just have to vent sometimes in order to get some frustration out, that's fine. I would have to say there is a time and place for that, but just know that if you're going to vent, you're not going to be able to problem solve at the same time. Those two are mutually exclusive. So you want to vent, but you've thrown away the opportunity to problem solve. And it's a little bit worse than that. You've also greatly decreased the likelihood of ever solving that problem in question, especially with chronic venting. So you pick which one you're going to do. It's going to be one or the other. It's never going to be both. And for those of you that think, well, if I just complain loud enough and long enough, I'll get my spouse to change their behavior. No.
But if you take him to a neurotypical therapist, I can promise you, I will even take bets that he's going to get neurotypical advice that will not take into account mind blindness, emotions blindness, executive function deficits, anxiety, sensory sensitivity, and about 5 or 6 other important. Love languages. Oh, I wish you could just speak to love. Those 5 love languages, that's not even one of those is his love language. Not one. His love language is just stop pointing out what I'm doing wrong and leave me alone more. That's his love. You want to speak his love language? Give him more space without complaining about it, without interrupting his private time, and stop pointing out everything that he's doing wrong. I'm not being funny. If you wanted to speak his love language, that was it right there. I'm not saying you should. You do what you want with that. But by God, that is his love language. You say what I say to him verbatim and see what he says. Well, Mark said your love language would be these three things. Me letting you have decompression time without interrupting you or complaining about it, and to stop pointing out everything you're doing wrong. Is that really would be your love language? I'd be really interested in seeing what he says. You think his love language is, oh, I want you to buy me, if you buy me more gifts, I'd do better. Or if you just provide me some quality time, we would really be getting along a lot better. No. You didn't do anything different than any other guy does. Neurotypical guy is just that you did it to a higher level. Any neurotypical guy is going to present his best self up front, especially when he first meets her. He's going to try to present very well. He's going to be on his best behavior. And then as the newness of the relationship wears off, which happens in a neurotypical marriage just like it does in a neurodiverse marriage, in the early going, she was his special interest. Now the newness of the relationship is kind of worn off. The romantic phase is over. And so, of course, he still loves her, but he's not, hyper-focused on, every step that she makes. I understand that you would think, well, I kind of feel guilty because I did present myself as somebody that wasn't the real me at the time. But I also understand her. She might think, I got all this empathy and social, emotional reciprocity and nurturing and sex and affection and everything in the beginning. And after time went by, he just kind of faded away. And now I'm kind of feel like I'm on the back burner. So I understand that too. I understand both sides. But the deal is this: you weren't trying to be deceitful or to trick her. You just wanted her to like you, and it worked. But now you have to be mindful of the fact that you're very task-oriented, and you will have to be mindful of the fact that sometimes I can get so lost in my tasks that I forget her. I still love her. She's not my number one special interest anymore, if the truth be known. Still interested in her, of course, still love her. Probably still die for her if I had to. She's not the main thing on the forefront of my mind all day. That doesn't mean you don't love her. And that doesn't mean that you can't catch yourself being too involved in your tasks and too distracted with work and special interests and such that she feels left out. So I would suggest that you give her a scale, have her watch this video first, and then see if you can be in agreement with her of a scale. I'm just going to make up a 1 to 5 scale. We're going to call it the distancing scale. 1 is you're very emotionally reciprocal, very affectionate, very attentive, making time for her, etc. And let's say as we go up the scale, you get more and more distant. And now 5 is you have been so focused on work and other things, you have unknowingly and maybe even unconsciously totally neglected her. So you're going to ask her, first of all, you're going to say, I may drift away from connectedness and not even know it. It would be helpful to me if we had a scale of 1 to 5. 1 is I'm super connected. 5 is I'm totally disconnected. It would be helpful to me if when I get to 2.5 or 3 on this distancing scale that you let me know. And she could say, remember that scale we talked about? Yeah. About you gravitating away from connectedness? Yes. Okay, well, you're kind of a 2.5-ish or 3-ish right now. Then you would go, oh, okay, well, thanks for telling me. I didn't catch it. But now that you told me that I'm drifting, now I know I got to get back to the blackboard and start paying attention to being connected. It's important for her to know that you like structure. And this helps provide you with structure. It also at some level appeals to your logic, which is your strong point. She might download this as, well, I'm going to have to constantly remind him then what's the point? Well, the point is you may drift and not know it. So it's important for her to be the compassionate coach in that sense, because she will notice it before you do. And so you're trying to meet her expectations for empathy and emotional reciprocity. But you have some blind spots, and she can be your seeing eye dog to, at some level on this point. But she can't have it both ways. She can't say, on the one hand, I want him to stay connected with me just like he did, or nearly like he did in the early going of the relationship, but I don't want to have to be the one to let him know he's drifting away. No. Can't have it both ways. Be nice if you could. It ain't going to happen. If you choose not to be the compassionate coach in this sense, you have chosen for him to drift away and not even know it. Now you're disconnected and pissed off again.
Hey, this is Mark Hutton. Would you like to schedule a one-on-one Zoom call? Okay, it's so simple. Just look under any of my videos in the description area. Click on this Calendly link. Now you see my calendar. Pick your month, your day, anytime that's available. Enter your name and email address. Then you'll get a follow-up email with the Zoom link on the day and time that you picked. And voila, we will talk.